The Baltimore Ravens had a roller coaster day at practice on Wednesday with multiple scary statements, stars stepping up on both sides, and a lot more. We talk about what happened coming up next here on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens. We are your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, and I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here today on this Thursday, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every day. We're free and available for you on all podcasting platforms. So if you're an audio form listener, whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your shows, we are here for you. Be sure to hit that follow button, hit that subscribe button. And also, if you are in video form on YouTube, you should hit that like button and the subscribe button over there as well. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, the sport stops sportsing like you want them to, but this summer FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We return, and it was quite the roller coaster on Wednesday for the Ravens. As I mentioned at the top there, multiple scary statements put out. We'll obviously talk about what happened with Mark Andrews and Joe DeLassandris in the first part of the show and kind of what that all means, talk about all of the details and get a full understanding of what happened there, because it was, heavy statement after heavy statement early on in the day, and we'll work through that in the first part of the show. Then in the second part, we'll move more into what happened on the field at practice. Stars stepping up on both sides of the ball. Other underrated players also continuing to make names for themselves. Then in the final part of the show, we'll get more into the who could the Ravens add category, where there is now a star pass rusher off the market, officially traded on Wednesday. Is there anybody else that the Ravens could go after, whether it is a pass rusher or another position? So let's get into it here. We have lots to talk about. Let's start with Mark Andrews. That was the statement that came out from the Ravens first, about 12:30 p.m., but the incident happened in the morning. And I'll just read the statement first, and then obviously we'll talk about it. So long story short, Mark Andrews was involved in a car accident going to practice, and the statement as it reads by the Ravens: Mark Andrews was involved in a car accident while driving to the Under Armour Performance Center early Wednesday morning. Andrews was evaluated by medical staff at the Ravens training facility and did not sustain any apparent injuries. He later joined the team for morning meetings. Mark was originally scheduled for a non-practice day on Wednesday and is expected to return to practice in the coming days. And then Mark Andrews himself ended up releasing a statement, and he said, "I appreciate everyone's thoughts and well wishes. This is a great reminder about the importance of wearing seatbelts and remaining alert while driving a car." So it's pretty unsettling to hear something like that, obviously, for anybody. It doesn't matter who it is, right? Car accidents are serious. And, I think, first of all, right, you got to be thankful that Mark Andrews was able to walk away from this. John Harbaugh ended up talking about it after practice happened. He was obviously, he wanted to speak on it. And he ended up saying the lesson here is wear your seatbelts. Said that it was a pretty significant car accident. Mark Andrews walked away with nothing, no scratches, no scrapes. John Harbaugh made that clear as well. And then there was a statement put out, I believe, let me pull it up quickly. Here we go. Baltimore County Police put out a statement on Mark Andrews in the car accident today saying, preliminarily, at approximately 9:45 a.m., officers responded to Lyons Mill Road in reference to a motor vehicle crash. The crash involved two vehicles that sustained heavy damage. No injuries were reported. So obviously, great news that both Andrews and anybody else who was involved in the accident, there were no injuries being reported there. So thankfully, everybody seems to be okay. Obviously, a very unnerving experience for Mark Andrews. And just, it's tough. Like, that's a scary thing to hear. Obviously, for Mark Andrews, him being a part of it, that's a terrifying thing to go through. And it is, safety is important. Luckily, he was able to walk away with nothing. And, even if he was scheduled for a vet day here, I'm not sure when he's going to return to practice. Obviously, seems like he's all good and ready to go, but it's just whenever he's able to get back and he feels comfortable enough to get back. So Obviously, that was the early statement of the day, and the big takeaway being Andrews seems to be okay. No injuries reported, but it was something that started the afternoon off on a very scary note. And then there was a statement made later by the Ravens, really not that much long after the Mark Andrews statement was released, and we learned about that. We then learned literally about 45-ish minutes later, 50 minutes later, about offensive line coach Joe DeLisandris. And again, I'll read the statement out. Offensive line coach Joe DeLisandris was hospitalized over the weekend for an acute illness, which will require ongoing treatment for an extended period of time. The hearts of the entire Ravens organization are with Joe D and his family, and we will continue to fully support them throughout his recovery. John Harbaugh also spoke about this at practice and ended up saying that Joe D is going to be out for a while. The Ravens ended up bringing on, I guess, a new offensive line coach, someone to be with the offensive line and coach the offensive line in the absence of Joe D. And, that's what they have to do in this situation. It's tough. It's difficult. But for Baltimore, Joe DeLisandris is a big part of what they do. But obviously, and John Harbaugh said this, the most important part here is his health and being able to cover as quickly as possible, smoothly as possible, and the health takes priority over everything. And Harbaugh ended up saying that, Joe D had surgery earlier this summer. He's recently had complications from the surgery. And you talked about how it was a blow on the field, right? We're not going to, overlook that part. But just because it's a blow on the field doesn't mean that, you're not paying attention to the health first. So just a really tough situation all around. And, thoughts, prayers go out to Joe D and his family, obviously, for me. And it stinks here. And more on it from John Harbaugh, saying that, he's widely respected and cherished in the organization. And as he focuses on his health, we offer him their unwavering support. So it's ongoing treatment for an extended period of time, John Harbaugh said, and the Ravens say. And George Warhop was recently added to the staff. That was the guy they ended up bringing in, who recently in 2022 was the offensive line coach for Houston, has a vast array of coaching experience. So he's going to be working with those younger players. But John Harbaugh did talk about how it is a big loss on the field and how, he's loved by the guys in the locker room. And, to have those two things happen, it's difficult. And Baltimore is going to have to bounce back, but it's understandable if, there's a little shaken upness, I guess is the word. But, you just hope and pray that things can get better as quickly as possible for Joe D and obviously for Mark Andrews, that everything is all good. And whenever he comes back, he does come back. But to open the afternoon, this is even before practice really started. Practice for Baltimore usually kicks up around 1:20. Again, the statement from Mark Andrews came out around 12:30, 12:25, and then this one came out right around 1:15, 1:20-ish. But obviously, the Ravens knew about it before the statements were released. That's obvious because they had to craft the statements up. But again, doesn't make it any more unnerving, any more tragic, any more anything, where those emotions are just, it's what you feel in those moments. But thoughts and prayers to Joe D again. Obviously very thankful Mark Andrews, nothing serious happened there, and he was able to walk away unscathed, because those things can be scary. And obviously so can what Joe D's going through. That's a scary thing as well. So it was, I guess, a scary early afternoon for the Ravens off of the field and working through all of that and just having that news all come out. But the Ravens did take the field for practice on Wednesday. And coming up in the second part of the show, we will be talking about what did happen on the field. Star players stepped up on both sides. We had other key contributors performing as well. Stay tuned. We got a lot to get to on the show. First, the show is sponsored by BetterHelp. And for me, for others, there are self-care non-negotiables. Maybe you never skip leg day or therapy day. When your schedule's packed with kids' activities, big work projects, and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. Even when we know it makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. And therapy has so many benefits, whether it's learning positive coping skills, how to set boundaries. It can empower you to become the best version of yourself. And it isn't just for those who've experienced major trauma. It's for everyone. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suit your schedule. Fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. We're back for our second segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostraker here with you on this Thursday edition of the show. Really appreciate all the support here, as I just hit 5 years on the show a couple of days ago. We hit 7,000 subscribers about a month or so ago, and we're building up towards 8,000 now. The show's been growing at a very rapid rate, and I can't thank everybody enough for listening, whether you're an everydayer, you listen every single day. If it's your first time into the show, welcome in. Or if you're somewhere in the middle, welcome back. We are 5 days a week here of Ravens content on Locked On Ravens. So tell a friend, tell a family member. If they want Ravens coverage, we have them covered here on this show. And also be sure to make your second listen of the day after you make Locked On Ravens your first, obviously. Your second listen, Locked On NFL. I host that show over on Mondays. We cover NFL content over there. So Ravens opponents, Ravens storylines to look out for that aren't Ravens related, you can head over there to Locked On NFL. Now, we did talk about the scary start to the day for the Ravens with Mark Andrews, Joe DeLisandris, but the Ravens did take the field at their normally scheduled time, and there was practice. Stars ended up stepping up on both sides of the ball. The defense certainly had their fair share of plays, and so did the offense. I mean, guys that have really, you've heard, some of these stars that you have heard throughout the course of training camp. Kyle Hamilton comes back from his injury. He continues to make an impact. Zay Flowers has big plays. Isaiah Likely has big plays as well. So it's something that, you know, you expect that out of those guys, but there will be some days the defense wins, some days the offense wins. It feels like, though, and according to Jess Rebeck here, it wasn't a very sharp practice for the offense. They had a good amount of pre-snap penalties apparently here. But then you also hear about names as not just the Likeleys and the Zay Flowers and those guys. It's guys like Anthony Miller, who was signed about a week or so ago now. And we've heard that name pop up really ever since he signed. He's made big play here, big play there, big play everywhere, it feels like. So he could be a guy that is maybe trying to scratch and claw for a roster spot. Baltimore, whether it be they keep 6, they keep 7 wide receivers, there are plenty of names to look out for, and Anthony Miller is one of them. But Clifton Brown, who works for the Ravens, does a great job over at BaltimoreRavens.com, gave his practice report, and Kyle Hamilton was the storyline of it. It was, as Hamilton was able to go out there. He performed at a high level. He was physical during padded practice as well. He had a hard hit on Owen Wright, and the tone setter, I guess, that he has been for the Ravens, he's going to continue that, of course, as his leadership role continues to grow. So that was big. Then you also have a bunch of other notes. Tavius Robinson and Kadir Ismail got very physical during back-to-back reps of one-on-ones, and you had Ismail getting leverage on Robinson in the first rep, and then Robinson had a quick first step and ended up going high on Kadir, and the helmet came flying off. The offensive players, including Patrick Ricard, wanted a penalty. Those snaps are actually on social media. I think, I forget who posted them, but they are there. Might have been Jonas Schaefer who posted them, so shout out to Jonas for that. But Jonas ended up putting them out there, and you saw in those clips, Tavius Robinson was getting high fives from his defensive teammates. Kadir was getting high fives from the offense. So, look, iron sharpens iron. Things get testy sometimes at practice. It's no hard feelings, obviously, but hey, both those guys getting better. Also, Deontay Hardy, who had to miss a lot of time over the course of the beginning of training camp with injury, and also had an excused absence during the other portion of the offseason as well. He ended up making a nice long play here. He had a catch and run, and he started to stack some days as well. So you're starting to hear about a couple of guys stacking days, Anthony Miller being one of them, as we just talked about. Deontay Hardy being another who I think is a lock on this roster due to him probably being Baltimore's main returner this season. But I do think, I think the misconception around Deontay Hardy is that, oh, he's just going to be the returner. He's going to get no offensive snaps. There are going to be certain situations, certain packages even, that he can be used and will be used on this offense because he's not just a guy that is only a returner. He does have the skill set to go out there and make some level of a contribution for the offense this year. Is it going to be, 100 catches for 1,000 yards? No. But I think there will be some impact to be had in that regard. Brandon Stephens and Rashad Bateman had some one-on-one battles that were competitive. Brandon Stephens ended up winning the majority. Stephens apparently has looked incredible for all of training camp, all of this offseason. If this is any indication, if the early parts of training camp here, any indication of anything, Brandon Stephens is going to have another incredible season. But Rashad Bateman did have one get on Stephens when Stephens ended up slipping and Bateman caught a long pass, and Bateman continues to ramp up here. Clifton notes that Bateman's continued to look stronger and stronger since returning to practice on Monday. And as I mentioned, Anthony Miller did have the day's longest completion. It was the catch of the day, the play of the day. The Ravens put it out on social media, and he adjusted his body, was falling to the ground, made a catch on a long throw from Lamar Jackson. David Ojabo, talk about another guy stacking practices, and we have talked about this, and we'll talk about it in the final part of the show with the star pass rusher conversation. But David Ojabo has stacked some practices as well, as he had a strip sack, knocked the ball out of his hand by accident, right? This is everybody saying, oh, how did that happen? He ended up having a strip sack on Lamar Jackson. He's in the backfield on his pass rushes. You're not able to hit the quarterbacks. That's why the strip sack was like, oh, that's an accident, not supposed to happen. But hey, you know what? You can feather in the cap for David Ojabo. There you go. So really encouraging to hear that he is stacking practices. And then again, Isaiah Likely just continues to dominate, continues to do his thing. He is a starting tight end in this league. But luckily, the Ravens also have a guy. Mark Andrews on the field is an absolute beast. So using those two together in tandem is going to be huge. And this is kind of like what we heard. Peter King went to Ravens training camp last year, and he was talking about how good Zay Flowers looked and said, if you want to stop Zay Flowers, you have to hold this guy, you have to tackle him to the ground before the ball gets there. And you hear Trenton Simpson was called for a holding penalty trying to keep up with Isaiah Likely, and he did have a bunch of completions during the 7-on-7 period portion of the day. Trenton Simpson also let an interception slip through his fingers on Lamar Jackson. He should have made the catch, but the reaction was there. He was in the right position at the right time. And then Pepe Williams also continues to have a strong week, as does Ardarius Washington. Pepe Williams ended up cutting in front of Malik Cunningham to have a pass breakup on what could have been a completion. Lamar Jackson, Zay Flowers were on the same page again, which should be no surprise to anybody if we're being honest here. And part of those do include, as Clifton notes, right as Zay is making his break, Lamar, he's already in his motion. The ball's already out. He's getting it to him right when he's in the break. And that's what we've been talking about. Lamar has such good chemistry with Mark Andrews, with Zay Flowers. That's the type of stuff we want to see with Bateman, where there is already that connection between the two of them, where when Zay is making his break, Lamar knows exactly where to place that ball. That timing can have a huge impact on opposing defenses and how they have to play some of these routes. And also, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Bo Braid here. Braid was impressive. He had an interception against Lamar Jackson that ended up being nullified by a penalty. I believe it was defensive offsides. But he's been stacking practices as well. He had a good preseason opener against Philadelphia. He had a good week of practice last week as well. So this isn't just about the stars, nor is it ever has been, right? We talk about how it's great for the stars to be able to show what they have. But at the end of the day, these guys at the back end of the roster are fighting for roster spots. And to see them stack is a really good thing. And sometimes it is just about getting into a rhythm where early on, especially if you're a younger player or you got pressure on you, sometimes it can be hard to establish something early because you have to get into a rhythm first. And I think now that we're not, what is this, week 3, I think almost week 4 of training camp, which is crazy to think about. These guys are now in a rhythm. They're in a groove, and that is a really important thing. And honestly, it has more of an impact on guys than I think some people do recognize. So good days on both the offensive and defensive sides of the ball for star players, for younger guys as well. I think just an overall, I guess, a steady practice on a roller coaster day, which I think was definitely needed with everything that went on. So, yeah, it's good to see these guys stacking up and coming up with the final part of the show. We'll continue our conversation, but in a different light. As a star pass rusher is now off the board. So does that mean there's an even better chance of the Ravens staying put? Can they still add people? We'll talk about what they could have up their sleeve next year on Locked On Ravens. First, this show is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. In the summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. So in the MLB, Gunnar Henderson in the MVP conversation. Maybe not the front runner, but he's certainly in there. So if you want those odds, head over to FanDuel. Or for the Ravens and Chiefs game, the Ravens opened up as 2.5-point underdogs for the NFL opener. If you like that line, if you want to see if it'll change, head over to FanDuel as well. So be sure to head over to FanDuel and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner in Major League Baseball. We're back. Our final segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here. Didn't go anywhere, and we are not going anywhere here on Locked On Ravens. We will be your home for 5 days a week of Ravens content. We go live after every single Ravens game that includes in the preseason. We're adding in game day episodes as well. Game day episodes won't be the preseason, but we'll start that up in the regular season. We'll have a 6 a.m. episode up for you every single game day to get you hyped up for the game, whether it's an afternoon game, a night game, 1 o'clock window, whatever it may be. We'll have that for you, particularly more so on Sundays. We're going to have weekday episodes anyway for the Monday night games, Thursday night games, but we do a bunch of bonus content as well. We're starting to hit the short form content a little more as well on YouTube and on social media. Speaking of social media, you can follow me over on Twitter at KLStriker34, and I started up the Instagram again over at KLStriker34. Really been hitting that hard as well, so if you want to throw a follow over there, I'd really appreciate it. Now, with Matthew Judon, this is who I'm talking about, star pass rusher. The option is now gone for the Ravens to get him in before the season begins. Judon got traded on Wednesday from the New England Patriots to the Atlanta Falcons. The compensation, a 3rd-round pick. I think for a lot of reasons, particularly the compensation, Baltimore was not going to be in on this deal. The contract made sense, but obviously I think Judon, and I've been on record saying this, I believe Judon has one more good deal left in him. Another thing here that's interesting for the Atlanta and New England deal is that there's no extension agreed upon between Judon and the Falcons. They're going to work towards it before the regular season starts. I guess we'll see how that goes. But we literally just had a situation like this with Hassan Riddick with the Jets where they made a deal for him in the offseason. Compensation was pretty much the same. And I guess there were just misunderstandings on both sides about what that contract was actually going to be. And now Reddick is holding out. There's a whole controversy. He requested a trade again after being traded in the off. So I don't know there. I think it is personally pretty risky to acquire a guy and not have a contract in place. Obviously, it doesn't backfire every single time. But if you're trading for a guy to sign him to an extension, if you trade for the guy and give up decent draft capital, the player does have some level of an advantage when you're talking about, well, you're not going to let me walk. The Ravens did this with Roquan Smith, and the Roquan thing was definitely more of a trial thing where it's like, how's he going to fit into the team? I think it's still, with them giving up the 2nd-round pick for him, it would have been a mistake to not retain him after giving up that draft capital. But even in Roquan's case, it was kind of like, well, okay, like if you don't want to give me my number, I'm just going to go somewhere else and you're going to lose the 2nd-round pick. Obviously, they would have recouped something with what he was going to get. They would have gotten a 3rd-round comp pick anyway. So the Ravens essentially were weighing, well, it's a round downgrade for at least half a year of Roquan. And that's what teams can kind of anticipate, where I think Matt Judon probably gets you a 3rd-round pick in the draft. So it's no harm, no foul, I guess, if you're talking about, well, if they lose him, if the Falcons lose him in the offseason, they'll just get a 3rd-round pick, 4th-round pick at the worst, probably back. But I think it's still interesting to see the Falcons who, and just to briefly go in on them, how they were mocked an edge rusher in all these mock drafts. Dallas Turner was the one from Alabama who was the guy for them. And they take Michael Penix. And now they go get their pass rusher. So I guess it all worked out in the end, and they still have a potential franchise quarterback of the future there in Penix. But it does take an option off the board for the Ravens, who I have talked about. If there is a need still on this team, it is for an established third pass rusher, established guy. Because look, hopefully David Ojabo or Tavius Robinson or Adisa Isaac can be that guy for them. That would help a ton because you don't have to go out in the market, see who's there, maybe give up draft capital, invest more salary cap space into a deal. If David Ojabo particularly can be that guy, I mean, it is so important for them to be able to have it doesn't have to be like even a 10-sack season. It doesn't have to be double digits. It can be 6 sacks, 8 sacks, 8.5. Like, that's still good for what the Ravens need out of David Ojabo. You know, I don't think anybody's asking for him to go have 15 sacks this season, right? But if that doesn't work, if an injury pops up, if it's just not as good as people think, and there's still a lot of growth to do, which is certainly possible, they might have to revisit that at the trade deadline. And a wide receiver is still a hot topic of conversation, and it always will be, especially, you know, with the way that Baltimore has, you know, not really added a number one vet for Lamar Jackson before, how the receiver position in Baltimore has always kind of been a conversation. That'll be a thing. But to me, I think if I had to pick a big need for the Ravens right now, it is the depth at edge rusher. Offensive line, there aren't a lot of guys left on the market that are needle movers. I think Connor Williams was the last guy, and the Ravens showed interest, but he went over to Seattle. So this could be a situation, and I honestly probably expect it to be where maybe they add 1 or 2 more guys before cut down day. And then there might be a guy that's cut on cut down day. You're sitting there, if you're Baltimore, and you're thinking, whoa, that was not expected. And that's happened before, where they've added a guy post cut down day, where they like a guy enough, and the guy you're not expecting to be there is all of a sudden there, and you make room for him, make it work. But the Ravens also like carrying salary cap space into the season. They like carrying options into the season. So I wouldn't be shocked if they kind of just see what they have, because you don't want to just block all these young guys in their playing time and then just not know what you have. But, you know, if it's not working, it's not working. Now, nothing has worked or not worked yet, right? I'm talking about different hypothetical situations that could happen. But what we do know is that Matt Judon's off the board. Hassan Reddick is still there, apparently, but also apparently he's not, because the Jets are saying, no, we're not trading him. What are you talking about? This is crazy. This is out of our own possibility. But there are going to be guys that as the season goes on and teams have either slow starts or they get injured, and, you know, there's not a lot of room for them to compete, they might be looking to offload some guys that could get them some draft compensation. And I think with the Ravens, they will have a lot of draft compensation coming their way in the next couple of seasons with all the comp picks they're going to get for the players they lost. They didn't go 1-for-1 on each of those picks. They will get 4 comp picks this season. It just depends on what ends up happening. So it's tough because, like, you know, you have Kyle Van Noy, you know, you have Odafe Owe, but even Owe is expected to take a leap. And if that doesn't work, what's the situation? If Ojabo also can't do it, what's your situation? So again, Baltimore's not going to go out there and sign like 8 new vets before the season starts that are all going to make their roster. But I would be shocked if they're not looking out there right now to see if they can upgrade anywhere, if they have their eye on anybody to potentially get cut. Is there a backup quarterback that gets cut? Does Tyler Huntley get cut? And does he come back as the backup if Josh Johnson can't get it together and Devin Leary can't perform enough for them? So I don't think the moves are necessarily like this is it and they're done and it's over. But I also wouldn't expect a major move. Like, do I think the Ravens should trade for Hassan Reddick? Sure, it'd be really cool in theory. But then you have to wonder about, well, what does that mean for re-signing Zay Flowers, re-signing Kyle Hamilton, re-signing Tyler Linderbaum, because that contract Reddick's going to get is going to be crazy. Plus, you got to give up some level of draft compensation. So he'd instantly become the best pass rusher on this team. Not debating it whatsoever. I think it'd be great. But there is another view that the Ravens do have to look at. And in fact, multiple different views the Ravens have to look at it from. So edge rusher is not the only position they could add at. But I do think that I expect them to trust their young guys early. We could certainly see something happen, maybe more so towards the trade deadline or during the cut down day period where there might be a guy that ends up hitting the market that you're just not expecting to right now. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Again, be sure to like the video on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, follow along in audio form, and subscribe over there as well. Coming up tomorrow, we'll be rounding out the week with more Ravens content. Stay tuned. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.